Um, I use my favorite way to do is weed barrier, and it's kind of, it's my favorite, and like I also struggle with it all the time, because it's woven plastic, like the black plastic that I usually only use for plants that I grow for a long time, like kale, collards, things that I harvest again and again, tomatoes, cucumbers. I wouldn't put it in for onions or bok choy or anything that's like a really small spacing either, because that means you have to either cut or burn a million holes. And I'm sure you've seen videos of the weed barrier before, but of course it's plastic. And I think all the time about all the microplastics that are in our bodies and in our soil. And I, of course, saw videos on Instagram about how the soil is the is like a bigger cache of microplastics than even the ocean. And that's hard to believe because of how big the ocean is. But anyway, I still use weed barrier, and I try to use it for like 4 to 5 years or even longer if I can, like treat it in really good condition, because it doesn't break down unless it gets ripped, and then you get like small pieces and of course again microplastics. But in the long run, I would love to, move entirely into like regenerative low-till practices that reduce weeds because you stop disturbing the soil and digging up the weed seed bank. I've talked about this before. This is like kind of what I'm doing, because this is why I chose to do permanent raised beds, is because I want to try to not compact or walk on the soil or disturb the soil so that the soil microbiome can grow and like do its thing, and then you kind of like create like a little ecosystem with all of the bacteria and fungi and nematodes and macrobacteria and or macroorganisms, worms, that aerate the soil and like eat decaying plant matter, which then turns it into fertilizer for the plants. And like, this is how the world works. So you make like a mini version of that in your garden. And of course, it's ideal if there's not microplastics. So I try not, I'm not using that much weed barrier at my farm, but in my experience, like that's in a scale, to scale, that's been the best method. And they also make single use plastic weed barrier, which maybe that's a longer story. Um, the other, I guess my other favorite method of weed protection is mulch. We talked about, I guess, weed barrier is plastic mulch. But on my pathways, I chose to do bark chips because they're pretty inexpensive. Like I can get them dropped free in my front door or on my driveway. And I dug out my pathways to like build up the soil in my beds. So then I was left like with a weedless bare soil that I put cardboard on and wet the cardboard like pretty extensively so that it wouldn't fly up and like disturb the wood chips. But after that, or like put it out when it's raining, that would be a good idea. But after that, I covered them with like 3 inches of wood chips to kind of bring the pathways a little bit farther up and like reduce erosion in my permanent raised beds, because that is obviously an issue. But then I never have to weed the pathways. Though, of course, because am experiencing a little erosion, there is a lot of weeds along the pathway, but not inside. And like, come on, that reduces weeds. And then I guess my last favorite, not method, but like is of weeding is trying to like get to them really early. If you get to weeds at a thread stage when they first germinate, when they just have cotyledons or like maybe a true leaf or two, then they're really easy to just like shave off or uproot, and then they'll die in the sun. But if you leave weeds too long, the roots are it's just bad for your body, and it's harder. And why wouldn't you try to? Well, there's a lot of reasons. There's not a lot of time for perfection in farming, but if I was perfection, that is definitely how I would weed. Uh, Regeneratively, no till, mulch, weed barrier, and getting to the weeds that get through as early as you can.